All right, sounds like a plan. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. And I'm playing this real dangerously today. I'm on a different laptop than I normally use. So let's see how this works out. Okay, so anyways, yeah, I wanted to show you guys today. I know you guys called me to see if I can present this PowerOffice solution. I think all of you have seen it already. I put it out there on Twitter. Where this thing got its start was about a year ago. I had the need to generate a Word document. And I went and looked around and said, okay, I'll use the Word Premium connector, which worked. Unfortunately, because of the way that it works, meaning you have to use plain text to insert into the Word document template, it always kind of sat wrong with me. I didn't like the way it worked. And then I didn't like that it had to use a premium license. I'm very frugal in doling out premium licenses, and most especially just don't even like using them, period. Now, which leads me down crazy paths in a lot of these solutions. But anyways, so I set out at that point to try to create a way to generate these Word documents. And somewhere along the way, I came upon this realization that a Word document is just a zip file. So if you've never done this before, you go take a Word document and change the file extension from docx to .zip. You now have an archive that you can extract and go dig in there and find all the assets that make up a Word document. That was like crazy to me. I'm like, how did I not know this? So immediately after finding that out, the gears just kind of started turning in my head. I said, okay, well, if I can do that to a Word document, I'm like, if you do that and you can get to the content of a Word doc, then I knew at the time Power Automate has the capability to open or extract an archive. I said to myself, this is going to be easy. Obviously, we're now talking a year later. It took about a month to realize the solution, so it wasn't the easiest thing to do. And the biggest pain point that I hit upon, or the biggest roadblock, was actually the fact that even though Power Automate can pull out stuff from an archive, it can't natively put stuff back in. So I just kind of sat there when I realized that I had done all this work to turn a Word doc into a zip file, extract the contents, get the Word document stuff that I needed to change. And then I realized, how am I actually going to put this back together? Thankfully, and I had a kind of another epiphany when I realized if you ever go into SharePoint Online or OneDrive and you select multiple files in there and hit the download button, you'll realize that it downloads it in a zip file format. So again, gears start turning, ball starts rolling. If SharePoint can do it, then so can I. So if you guys haven't done it before, hit the F12 button for the developer console, and here I am spending a day digging through what SharePoint is doing in order to create that zip file, because it's obviously having to send the content somewhere. It's making some sort of API call to do that. And sure enough, I was able to find what it was doing. After a lot of banging my head on the desk, I was able to piece apart what it was sending, because it's actually really interesting, and I'll kind of touch upon it as I go through the flow itself. But it composes a specific request that it sends over to, actually it's a media service on Azure or something to that effect. And so you provide all the file, effectively a folder and its contents, and it generates a zip for you and gives that back. And then from there, really easily, you just take that file, upload it to whatever location you want it, and just name it .docx, and it works. All of that is very easily said. It was a lot harder to actually get done. And partly because of some of the things that I've already mentioned. And then the other part is just because of the way that that Word documents live. So even though you can get at the contents of it, it's stored in what's known as an OpenXML file. So before I kind of go further down that route, because I feel like I'm just going to talk everyone's ears off and I'm not actually showing anything, I wanted to just demo the solution for you guys first, and we can see, kind of what I was aiming for. In the broader scope of things, what I wanted to be able to do was very simply come into a Word document and then type in, I can go, I can say hello world, and obviously, that would work. That's just a normal file. What I wanted to be able to do, though, was something like this. And again, this is me being incredibly brave at this moment, because this is a raw file that we're just working with from scratch right now that I'm just going to save. And I'm going to upload this very same file. Let me open up my file explorer. I'm going to upload it to a location that I have already set up for us here. Let me find that one. Okay, so I have a hello world document that I'm throwing into this template library. And now I'm going to hopefully be able to replace some of the text that's inside of there. So just for this presentation, so you guys know, I put together this app. Originally, it was going to be really, really simple, but I don't do very simple. I just ended up doing a lot more to it than I expected. So if you're curious, I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to click this button. It's going to pre-populate a lot of the stuff that we need. I don't need this. I don't need that. And I don't need this right now. Okay, but I will need most of this. You'll notice in this example app, it's just kind of, I put it together just to kind of show you guys what is quote unquote expected from your side to give to the scope definition that I created. And then we could actually work towards how it does what it does. So if you remember, though, I named that file that I uploaded a second ago, hello world.docx. So I'm going to change this here to hello world.docx. And I just want to make sure this works. I'm going to hit this preview template button. And what this is actually doing is, rather than just grabbing, a link to the file, it's actually going through a conversion process, taking that Word document, calling the media service, and ultimately returning a PDF example or converted PDF of that same file. So we have our hello world and hello name down here, right? This has absolutely nothing to do with our solution. It's just for me to prove out that this is actually our file. Again, I overcomplicated this thing for the sake of overcomplicating it. But anyways, that said, I'm going to minimize this. And here's where I'm going to go and start adding placeholders. So if I hit this add placeholder button, I now have a place where I can do what is known as the key. So it's a key value pair, right? So key is the placeholder text that you're replacing, and the value would be what you are actually replacing that with. So if we pull this up, I use the key name in here. So I'll just go ahead and set this to name. And then for our name, I can just go ahead and pick anybody here on this call. So Rochelle, I'll just use your name. Okay. And obviously I don't have any images on this particular document, nor do I have a repeating table, but I'll show you guys that in a second. But I'm just going to click on the create file here and just have this fun little rocket animation going on again, overcomplicating this thing. So while that goes on, let me jump over to the actual flow and we can see what's happening here. So go in here and we have our flow running. As you see, through my testing, just so you guys know, runtime for this whole process to go, it does depend on what you're providing, right? If you have a ton of images, obviously it's going to take longer. If it's just text, it's pretty quick, usually under a minute. But here, this one will run. It'll probably be finished before, yeah, there you go, 30 seconds. Okay, so if I click on this run, I'm just going to walk through kind of what happened, and then I'll go into the edit view. And by the way, you guys are welcome to interrupt me at any time if you have a specific question about what you're seeing. A lot of this stuff makes sense to me just because I built it. But even me, I go back into it and try to figure out like, what is this doing and why did I do this half the time? just because agile development at its finest, basically. All right, so all this stuff down here, you can ignore. That's just development stuff that I've been playing around with. Respond to a Power App or flow. That was just for this sample app. So if you notice, I basically respond with a link to the file, whether it's the Office one or the PDF one. If you click on it, it just launches where that file was. And cross my fingers, it should have the name. Yep, there we go. Name is changed. That was our placeholder text getting flipped over, right? But what is it actually doing? That all happens inside of this populate office template scope, which really is a scope of scopes, of scopes, of scopes. It's got a lot of stuff in here. But what's nice about it, and something that I try to do in all the solutions that I put out there, is I try to generalize this as much as possible. It makes development work a lot more difficult. But honestly, I do it also because it helps me. Like I want to be able to copy and paste some of these, flow components into other, any of my solutions and not have to do a lot of upfront work or any other work except for just putting in the expected inputs. It just makes it easier because what I found last year, when I said it took about a month to do it, the solution I came up with then, which follows most of this, was still specific to the documents that I was creating. So yeah, I did get to do placeholder text. And yeah, I can do rich text and all that fun stuff. But I couldn't easily just, take that logic and put it somewhere else. So a lot of the time that was spent since then has been, generalizing this so that you or I or anyone really could just come in and with just a few fairly simple inputs would be able to generate a Word document or a PDF document, or you'll find out in a second a PowerPoint document as well. So and again, the thing I find a little bit harder to deal with when it comes to Power Automate and Microsoft Flow in particular is that there's not really the concept of a component like you get inside of a Power App, right? In a Power App, you can create a component and designate inputs and have users provide that for you as soon as they try to use the component. So what you're seeing now being a scope of scopes with inputs is about as close as I can get to it, because I can go in here and I can copy this scope definition. And in this case, I pasted it all inside of a GitHub repo that I have here. And that allows you to come in and copy this same scope definition and paste it, excuse me, into any one of your flows, and it'll just bring all of this over for you. That's like the easiest way if you're ever curious, how do I move stuff around, or how do I keep some of this on your tool belt? That's how I move a lot of my things around. But that does also introduce a few other challenges if you guys have worked with scopes before. One of them being you can't use variables inside of a scope. And when I say that, I mean you can't initialize a variable inside of a scope. It has to be initialized outside of it, and then you could theoretically set it inside of it. Another downside with variables, if you haven't heard about this before, is just performance-wise, they tend to be slower to work with. So I try to avoid them as much as possible in all of my solutions, and I managed to avoid them entirely in this one, and that's how I was able to give you just one single scope definition to copy-paste. All right, so enough talking. Let me continue showing you guys. So the inputs you provide, there's some of the basic ones, Sharepoint site URL. So the way I set this up and the idea behind it was, regardless of where your data is coming from. So in this case, it's a Power Apps trigger, and I ask for this stuff. So when I go and I fill in my formula, I'm asking myself, in this case, for a site URL, the template library, the destination library, and all these other things. I then take the inputs that I got from here, and I stick them into each one of these compose steps, which then, and that's all you have to do, because everything else here is already pre-configured to get what it needs from the things that you provided. So that includes, you give the Sharepoint site URL. the rest of the actions are taking that. There's a lot of other things happening with that site URL, but you don't have to really know about it. You don't really have to care about it because the flow knows what to do. So some of the things I'll call out here in particular are this here where it says the replacement table string. So in Power Apps in particular, there is a JSON function which lets you convert any one of the collections that are in there or a record. You can create a JSON string. So I'm going to click on this create file step really quick and just show you where that happens. So I have here we go. Where did I put it? Update context here. Sorry, that's not the right one. Bear with me. Here we go, sorry. Okay, so here's our text placeholder table, which is a collection. It's actually the contents of that table that I put the name in there, the name placeholder. And I'm just wrapping it inside of the JSON, or wrapping it with the JSON function to turn it into a string, which I can then pass into Power Automate. The only reason I do that is because it's the fastest and easiest way to give it to Power Automate, but it also comes in handy when we're passing over things like repeating tables, and I'll show you those in just a second as well. But the input of that gets stuck inside of here, right? So this is a JSON representation of your key value pair table. Placeholder delimiter. So if you notice, when I created my Hello World doc here, I did 2 pipes to basically stick my placeholder inside of. You can do whatever you want as long as they match. So I can go in here, I can do 3 forward slashes and 3 forward slashes here. And it doesn't matter as long as they're both the same on both ends, and as long as it's unique inside of your document, then you won't run into any problems. Again, the reason why I did this was I didn't want to go off of the assumption that everyone will be able to use 2 pipes for their placeholder delimiters. It's that flexibility of you yourself, you know your own data, you know your own content and whatever you're putting in here. So it's just better that way to build that flexibility into this solution. All right, so that was the placeholder delimiters. Image replacement string, we'll talk about that in a second. And then send document to an output file name. All of these, they're fairly self-explanatory. Send document to, you'll see later on in the flow, and if you copy paste this into your own flows, there is actually it's just a condition check. And this was more for my uses. I just kept it in there because it's helpful. Because it does take roughly 30 to 60 seconds to run this flow. And that's as efficient as I've been able to make it. I'm sure there's probably some stuff in there that can still be tweaked, but I've kind of eked everything out of there. In my personal opinion, I don't want to keep a user waiting for 30 seconds even for something to get processed. I just as well just send it to them in an email. And it is something that I do in the solutions that I've created using this. The pattern that I follow is when a user clicks the button, I notify them, hey, this is being processed. And I'll send them the email with the content attached, right? You could do the same thing inside of Microsoft Teams or any other platform, honestly. But it's just, I've found it's a lot better, and users have a better perception of the application if they don't get tied into waiting. There's no point in making you wait unless you're going to do other functions in the application. And then even in that case, it's certainly not good to keep you waiting for 30 seconds for a document to download instead of just letting you kind of go on your merry way and then notify you, whether it's an email or even in the app itself, that your file is ready. So that's what this send document to function is for. And then the last things that we have is really this the destination library, which kind of goes hand in hand with the template library. Template library is literally just where you stick your Word document. I showed you guys that here earlier. It's just a basic library. And then template library, same thing, just a basic library. Again, you don't have to do anything with these short of just setting them up and pointing the flow to it, and the flow will take care of it from there. So let me pause for a second if you guys have any questions. If not, I'll keep going. So Troy, Duke, Rochelle, any questions? Okay. And let me know if I'm talking too fast too. Trying to be cognizant of time, but I can slow down if I have to.
You're doing just fine. Go ahead.
Perfect. All right. So now we start getting into some of the stuff that the flow itself is doing. So obviously you're providing, the inputs here. Template type. We are now going to take in this case, I'm doing trigger body. I should have done, actually, it's a good thing that I saw that. I'll update that. What we're doing is we're checking to see whether it's a PowerPoint file or a Word file, because we're going to make use of that later on inside of the flow. And then in here, we have so we're filtering the JSON inside of the table for repeating tables. And what this is actually doing is it's looking for, it's better shown than said. If I go back into our app here, I'm going to click this guy to generate something for us again. Okay, so this time I do have a repeating table that's been generated over here on the right. And you can see it's very basic, right? I have a placeholder here that's just, in this case, it's table placeholder. And I have this is a collection, right, of items like you normally would. I can go in here, I can add another item if I wanted to, and start doing that. So what's happening though, in this particular example, is whenever I make changes to the repeating table, it's going to the placeholder here, and it's inserting a key matching the table name in this case, or the placeholder text, and then again a JSON JSON representation of the repeating table itself. So these are some of those things as just looking at the available, basically it's going through the thought process of what data could I easily get from a user, and how can I parse or look at that data in a way that makes this as automated as possible. I didn't want you guys to have to go in there and manually type in a lot of this information. And for me, using the JSON function is about as easy as it gets. But as a result of that, and again, to challenge myself, it also means, well, I then have to go, if I'm not going to make quote unquote you or I do it, then the flow is going to have to do the work of figuring that out. And in this case, what we're doing is it's not particularly difficult. We're just looking at the table of key and key value pairs, right, that we gave for replacement text. And we're just checking to see if the replacement text starts with a square bracket and it ends with a square bracket as well. So we are literally just looking at this big string that gets passed into it and seeing, does that have a square bracket? Yes. Does that have a square bracket? Yes. And then this is a repeating table, and we'll do repeating table functions on it going forward. That's about it. So this here, all of these guys, it'll just treat it as normal text replacement. This one, it just kind of intuits, hey, you're giving me a repeating table, so that's what I'll do for you. So that's what's happening here. And then just below it is where we start kind of getting really crazy. So if it actually found repeating tables in this particular replacement string that you gave it, now we're going to have to do the process of turning said table into something that Word will recognize. So before I get into that, let me quickly jump over to a PowerPoint. And it's very, very short, but and I wasn't originally going to do it, but it's kind of hard to visualize this without actually literally visualizing it with you guys. So what you're seeing right now is a very, very basic Word document. It's actually a similar representation to our Hello World document that we have that I showed you guys earlier. If you've never looked at what's known as the XML document for a Word file, this is kind of what it looks like. There's actually a lot more text than this, but this would work theoretically. So, aside from the basic boilerplate stuff like the XML version, you then start having other tags specific to the document, right? So the document ends on both ends. You have the body of the document. If it's a paragraph, then you have the paragraph tags. You have what are known as the text run tags inside of here, and then you have the actual text content inside of here. So a paragraph cannot have paragraphs within it. It's the top level of that particular space. It can have multiple runs inside of it. And honestly, technically, a run it's just a way to kind of keep things that are formatted the same on a particular run of text. So if it's bold, then you'll see it in its own run, followed by unbolded text following that. But that's all it is. I say that's all it is, but it kind of makes things more difficult for us to deal with later. But that's all right. And then obviously you have your actual text inside of the text space in there. So I mentioned to you guys earlier. So what we do as this flow goes as part of this solution. So by telling you, replace whatever you need to, whatever placeholder, you give me a delimiter and a placeholder name. This is what's actually happening in the XML of the Word document. So, this was, again, this is easy enough to do inside of Word. There are some caveats to this. And the biggest one that I've run into myself is that spelling matters. Word, even though what you're seeing right now is a very clean one, if you misspell your placeholder value, Word, just because of how it works, it actually then starts adding, it breaks up where the misspellings happen with other tags, which makes this whole process just kind of fall flat on its face. There are ways to fix it. It involves going into the XML content, and I'll do that in just a second. It's not that hard, but it's something to keep in mind if you do end up using this solution. But anyways, back to what I was saying here. Now that we have this, what this enables us to do is in Power Automate, we basically take that text that we gave, and we're splitting the document on those placeholders. And this slide, it's not immediately obvious, but one thing that's missing here now, if you'll look closely at it, is the 2 pipes on either end of name. Because in reality, this is now, at least in this presentation, representative of a collection or an array of a bunch of different text strings, including our name value here. So again, easier said than done, but our goal now is to replace this name placeholder, now that we have it, with the name that we provided it. In this case, it's going to be Nate. And then once we've done that to all of our placeholders, we're then going to bring it back together using join, which will give us the XML text that we want, just in a way that Word will like it. And we stick that inside of a Word document, and that's it. That's what it's doing. So again, if you guys have any questions on that, let me know. That was about as simplified as I could make the Word open Office XML for just a short amount of time. But as I was mentioning, because of the way that those brackets are configured, we have to account for it when we do something like create a table. So this solution does support multiple tables inside of a single Word document. You can put more than one placeholder for a table and it will do it. But as a result, you can imagine we have to, one, loop on the table. And another thing I'll point out is I try to avoid loops as much as possible. But two, we then have to extract not just the values, the replacement values, but we also have to extract the header values, because those aren't, you're giving it to us in the form of JSON, but we're not getting it past that. So the way that this is doing it, and honestly, half this stuff I've already forgotten just because of how out there it is. But we're using something known as XPath. And you're welcome to Google it, but this is an XPath formula inside of here where we basically take the JSON string of this table, and we're turning it into XML. And then we're using this XPath function to traverse that XML to get what we want. So in this case, on the left, we are simply going through and we're pulling what's known as, so this is already kind of crazy here, but if you look at this mapping formula, we are pulling, if you look at the top of it, it says XPath item name /star. That is just a crazy way of saying, give me the key for this particular JSON string. You'll see there's a bunch of other things in there. You could ignore it for right now, but that's what we're doing. And we do the same thing on the side over here for the element, or for the value, the replacement value. We turn it into an XML string. We use XPath to traverse it. And this one, though, you'll notice is even more insane. What we are actually doing here is we are building a row. So we're setting it up, we're putting, if you think about it like HTML, we're putting a TR and a /TR and a TD on all of these things to ultimately give me a string. And if you guys are getting lost at this point, this is the part where I say, don't worry about it, because that's why this is built the way it is. These are the things I didn't want to think about when I was building or when I was substituting placeholders in a word table, quite honestly. Moving down here, though, and then I kind of hurried up for you guys. This is where we start doing some of the other things that we were talking about earlier, where we take the document. So you give me a document name as part of this solution, and we're just using the extract folder action, right? So you can give it literally a docx file, use extract folder. It knows it's an archive, and it goes and creates a folder for you. So we're taking that, we're creating a brand new folder as a copy of the document template in our destination location. And then we are going, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to go down the word path. But then we are going in and we're getting a specific file content, which is the document XML inside of that Word doc. So just really quick, if I can do this. So if I go in here and I rename this hello world, I actually probably should make a copy because I have it open. If I rename hello world to hello world.zip and then open this guy up, this is what we're doing inside of Power Automate. I have a folder of a document. I'm going into the Word section, and then I'm opening this document.xml, and I'm getting that content, which is nice because the way it gets returned is just a plain text string. And again, Power Automate can work with text strings really easily. You'll notice down here then, template XML string, this is actually just a way to join these together. Obviously, there's different branches. I mentioned to you guys earlier, I don't want to use variables. So this is just a coalesce function that will take any one of those branches, and that's the value that I'll use going forward. So it works almost exactly like a variable would. I just can do it inside of a scope. So that's why we do that. But this is where we start doing that split thing that I mentioned to you guys. We're taking the XML string, like that hello world example I showed you. We're splitting on whatever the delimiter is that you have. And that's going to give me an array of text strings. And then inside of here, we are going to, so this is now for every text string, we're doing a check to see if that particular text that you pulled out, if that exists inside of our replacement table as a key. And then if it does, so this is a filter on that replacement table. If it does do that, then we can check that and we can see, and this actually grew. It used to be simpler to look at, but we check to see, did we match something when we did a filter? If we did, then that's the value, the replacement value, that's what I want to use. If we didn't, then just continue using whatever the current text is. So if you can picture very quickly here. So if you can picture our array, the loop, inside of the loop, all you're looking at is this, right? So you see this big blob of text. And does this match our replacement table anywhere? It doesn't. And then you'll see, you'll see name. Does this match? Yes. So then replace it. And this finally we get here. Does this match anything? No, it doesn't. Ignore it. We'll just use what came with it. And again, where all that comes in handy is now we have this updated XML string. We're just joining that entire array right back together. And what's really, really, really cool about this part is this is known as the Peter method, where you're joining a compose action inside of a loop, outside of a loop, but everything that you did in the loop stays in order. So we're using that to our benefit, because even though we're exploding this text into a bunch of different pieces, and we are running this concurrently, right, at full concurrency, we still are able to put it right back together in the exact order that it came from originally, which is the only way we were ever going to get a valid XML string to give back to our Word document. And then finally, generate this document here. I can let you guys poke around with it later, but these are making calls to the service in SharePoint. One, we're making a call to it to get the zip file. This is actually being fed, and this is a pattern that I applied in this case. We run these as parallel branches. Obviously, when we made a copy of the folder, I need to go get the attributes. I don't need to do it before or after this. I can do it right alongside it. So I'm making calls to get specific folder attributes that I'm going to need in order to generate the zip file. And that's what I'm feeding in here. Again, you guys can go poke around and see how that all works. But we're using the send an HTTP request to SharePoint. And this one I wanted to call out. When I first created this solution, I was using the HTTP action. And it was killing me, because then that basically meant, okay, now it's a premium feature. So it was kind of just, net compared to the Word doc as far as I was concerned. And then I think it was like a month or two ago, somebody posted a blog post about generating zip files in SharePoint. And I'll have to find it because I got to give that person credit. But when I was reading it, what I realized is that person used the send an HTTP request to SharePoint. Everything else that this flow was already doing was exactly the same thing. So I just had to copy and paste it, stick it in here, and voila, this flow is now premium free, which is awesome for me. Like I mentioned, I love doing this stuff without using premium licenses. So does anyone have any questions here? Okay, just the last thing I wanted to show you guys, I know we're kind of short on time here, but you'll see I have, I regenerated this. I'm using, let me reset this. So I'm going to use this sample invoice document file for the sake of this demonstration. Wait for this to reload. So this is just an invoice like you normally would. You probably can't read this, but in here, let me see if I can zoom in on it. Sure it can. So in here, you'll notice I have a placeholder for table placeholder. I have a ton of other placeholders as well over here, all basic stuff. And I'll highlight this. This is bold. This is bold and larger. So one of the benefits of using this particular flow is you can do that. You can't do that with the standard Word one that's offered. I don't have an image yet to do this, so let me get rid of that. I'm going to hit create file. While that happens, it's going to take 30 seconds. Let me show you one other thing here. Sample invoices right here. Let me download that. And let me drag this over. So I'll wait for this to finish, and if you give me 10 seconds, I'll show you how you actually get the images. So we have our sample invoice document here. I'm going to rename it .zip like I did earlier with Hello World. I'm going to go into the document and go into the Word folder. and then go into the media one. And you notice this image1.png, that is the logo in the top right corner. And that's what it's called. That's what Word refers to it. And that is actually what this thing is looking for. So if I hit that and type in image1.png, again, for the purpose of demonstration, I can either do a SharePoint replacement, which does, so if it sees a URL to SharePoint, it'll make a call to SharePoint to get the content and use that as a replacement. If it doesn't, then it will do the content replacement file. So do this here. And let me find the document that I was looking for. I have my corporate, and I'm going to hit create file. Excuse me. And then while that finishes running, let me go into our destination library and PDF. So this is the destination library. Flow automatically created these based on what templates you're using. Temp folder, this is the extracted Word documents where it's being saved to, modified. And then depending on whether it's a document or a Word doc or a PowerPoint, sticks it in either one of these. And PDF, it'll do it in there. So this was the first one that I did when I started it. So you see it's got our O365 icon. These are all the text that got replaced there. That one comes with, that's that. I did do a text replacement, so it's probably worth checking to see whether that worked or not. So if we come in here, and I'll click on View PDF, hopefully this worked. Yeah, sure enough, it did. So now you have the icon that has been replaced with the file contents that I updated there. I could go and I guess I should point out this. You can see there's now a repeating table where there wasn't one before. This is all generated dynamically on the fly, and it's just, it's magic, honestly. So does anyone have any questions?
So how long did it take to generate that file?
This one here, let's go up.
Yeah. I know the simple one was about 30 seconds, so I'm wondering what that one is.
Let's go see. It would have been either of the two ones at the end. So yeah. There you go, about 49 seconds.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. And I just, when we talk about PowerPoint, just so you guys are aware, PowerPoint handles things just slightly different. Whereas a Word doc will put it inside of a single document.xml, PowerPoint sticks each individual slide in its own XML file. Rather than looping through every one of those doing replacements, which would slow the flow down, what I did in that case was I would get the contents, all the contents of that, cram them together onto one big blob of text, do my replacements, and then tear it apart back into slide files to put it in there. So it's all, like I said, if you guys go look at this thing, there's all sorts of, things done in the name of efficiency and getting this to run as fast as possible. But quite honestly, this is just the beginning of where I ultimately want to end up. This is certainly not ready for consumption, but this retrieve document content, the idea behind it, and honestly, I don't know what we're going to see, but I'll open it up. But the idea behind it is if you give the document template that you're looking to work with over to a flow, we could theoretically then go create a copy of that document, retrieve that document.xml that we were talking about, and then feed it back to your Power App as a JSON string or object. And then we can work with it like we would any other record in Power Apps using patch statements and collects and all of those things. That is, and this is not done, but that's kind of my end goal, is to work. It's going to be two-pronged attack. One is going to be, can I go get contents of a document, give it back to Power Apps to actually do the work on it? And then two, can I just build it from Power Apps directly? Yeah, the schema for a Word document is not the easiest to work with, but it's also not that bad. If you know what you're building here, you can, generate most of this from scratch if you wanted to inside of a Power App. What that's going to entail is going to be creating custom code components that work as functions. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to finishing that one.
Do you know C#?
I do not.
Yeah, because that's if you want to build the custom code in a Power Automate connector, that's what you would need to use for it.
Well, one of the things that I like working with, if you haven't done it before, and now we're going way off topic, but it's the newly released custom code components.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is actually how I plan on doing this.
Okay. Yep.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions for Ramiro? All right.